Gentlemen, welcome back to a new article. I'm Simon and this is the Joy of VFX. The Joy of VFX is thought as a happy place where some special effect artists come together and try to mimic some effects inspired by movies, for example. And the goal is to look at the different approaches from the visual effect artists and compare them with all their pros and cons. By the way, it was not my idea, it was the idea from Sultans and Atilla, and they proposed to me that we could put it on my blog, and during this process I noticed it costs a lot of time to prepare all that stuff, so further joys might be published on a separate blog so that we have a separate project, but the first one is published here. So the effect we want to look at is the Pintable. You can see such a Pintable in, for example, the X-Men movie, and also the renders from Lee Griggs were a huge inspiration. And the goal is to mimic this effect and bring it into an engine of your choice. In our case it was Unity and Unreal. And to be honest, at the beginning I had no idea how to start with that, so I asked Sultan and he explained me the basic concept. First we will go over the basic concept, and after that we will compare the different approaches from me, Sultan and Atilla. So the basic concept starts with a simple cube which you move up and down. In fact, you move the vertices of that cube up and down via vertex shader. But we don't want that the whole cube is moving up and down, right? We want that the bottom stays where it is. So what you can do is you can set the vertex color of the lower vertices to black, for example, and multiply it in the shader which moves the vertices up and down. And since the vertex color is black, so it's a value of 0, also the movement gets nullified. So and what you can see is that now only the top moves up and down. And if you now use a high map to control the height, and not in our case it was a sine wave, then it will look like that. You see that the different vertices move up and down in different manner depending on the brightness of the high map pixels. And this is because the vertices have different locations on the UV mapping. What you can do to have a straight roof is to put all the UVs on the same spot, so that every of these 4 vertices samples the same information from the high map. And then you get a really nice up and down movement, and every vertex has the same height. This looks already nice, so we have one pin. And now you can duplicate all these pins, but what would happen now is that every one of these pin cubes moves up and down in the same manner. And now we want to change that, so we can offset the UVs depending on the position of the cube, so that every cube samples a different location, and this looks like that. And this is more what we want, right? It looks almost like an equalizer from your stereo or something like that. So this was the basic concept. And now let's look at the different approaches we choose to put this into our engines and to put our own ideas into it. So I will start with my approach. And as you can see here, I didn't use a cube as a geometry, I used a pyramid. And only the middle vertex is colored white, so only it moves up and down. And yeah, I wanted to have it a bit more spiky. And as you can see, I try to mimic the Liberty Island you can also see in the X-Men movie. And during this process, I stumbled across an interesting problem. Using a 3D software like 3D Studio Max or Maya or Blender or whatever, I'm used to that when I change the orientation of a surface, that the normal gets aligned with it, right? But actually, this is not the case when the vertex shader changes something on your mesh. In that case, you have to recalculate your normal. The normal stays how it is if you don't change it. So what this means is that the lighting does not change. On the left, you can see the normals don't care at all. They just keep their orientation from before. And yeah, I mean, the lighting does not change on these triangles. On the right, you see what you have to do. You have to recalculate the normals after you modify the mesh. And here's an example how this looks. You can see the unmodified version with ambient occlusion. Without it, you wouldn't see too much at all. And then we have the version where I recalculated the normals, and yeah, this looks how I would expect it. And in Unreal, here you can see the graph. This is how it looks. It's actually pretty simple to do that, to do the recalculation. But I was asking myself, how does it actually work? I mean, is this magic or what happens there? Especially because in a pixel shader, you can convert a high map to a normal map in real time. Yeah, you have this high map with only gray values, and then you calculate normal map out of it. And the secret is comparison. You take one pixel and look at the neighbor pixels. Here you see one pixel, and I visualized the brightness of the pixel as its height. And here is another one, the neighbor pixel. And as you can see, it's a bit brighter. And here you can see the normals for both of the pixels, which we now have to modify. The question is how. And what you can do is you can calculate the difference between the both heights of the pixels. And then you get the slope. And if we orient the normals depending on that slope, we can modify our normals depending on that. But what you can see here in that example is that both pixels would get the same new normal orientation because we only have one slope, right? Luckily, the graphic card always calculates with 4 pixels at the same time in a 2x2 grid. So this means, as you can see here, we not only compare one neighbor with the current pixel, no, we always compare 2 neighbors. And as you can see in this visualization, this creates different slopes and different normals for every of the 4 pixels. The problem with my solution is that it creates many thin triangles, which are kind of a worst case scenario, because you not only get many ugly edges if you have no anti-aliasing activated, but also the GPU does not like long thin triangles at all. And if you want to know more about that, you can read the Render Hell article where this problem is described in a more detailed way. Now let's have a look at Sultans' approach, but before we start into it, let me see that I don't explain every detail in this video. If you want to see really everything and every detail, then please read the article. We will go over the basic concept and the different approaches, but I think it would just be a bit too much to explain everything. So, Sultan has an Unreal 4 project, and for this he created a Pintable garden. And as you see here, he used hexagons instead of cubes or pyramids like I did. And this is one of the biggest changes. He created his geometry in a 3D software, and every hexagon has a center vertex and 2 UV cells. And interestingly, right now all the hexagons are connected to each other, so you can't move them up and down separately like you would expect it from a Pintable. So what he is doing, he uses tessellation, and with that he creates new edges. And with the help of a mask, he can now separate the vertices which are allowed to move up and down and those which are not allowed to move at all. The whole process is really interesting, and I would suggest to read about it, but this should be enough for this video. So the tessellation is used to create more geometry, and instead of a high map like I used as an input for the up and down movement, he uses a real 3D geometry which is hidden somewhere in his level. And basically a camera, in Unreal it's called Scene Capture 2D because there are no orthogonal cameras, but that's a detail. You can read more about this in the text. Basically it's a camera capturing this scene from above and putting out some textures. In that case a high map texture and a color texture. And these textures are used as an input for the Pintable. So as you can see here, there are the textures for the maze, and this is used as an input to push the columns up and down. And in this case, the whole texture is slowly rotating. He had exactly the same problem with the normals. He modified his geometry and then he had to recalculate the normals. And he chose a different approach. He basically applied the normals hard-coded. And if you want about the colors, please have a look in the text. There everything is explained about the correlation between normals and colors and all that stuff. But just as a small spoiler, with his technique, he basically gets a free bevel edge on the corners of his columns, which is really cool. And this looks really nice. But there are some problems, and one is that you can't rotate the whole maze because of the way how he applied the normals. The lighting would be wrong if you rotate the whole maze, but I mean, in his project, it's just not necessary to rotate the whole thing, so everything is fine. And like in my example with the many small, thin triangles, he got some aliasing problems, but he had a really nice workaround because he just added some self-illumination to his columns, which reduced the harsh contrast between light and shadow. And in addition, it looks really nice and interesting with the self-glowing areas. And now we have a look on Attila's approach. His results look really nice, and to create them he used Unity and a mix of C# and some shaders. He did also other experiments with some atmospheric ocean pintable, and as an input for this, he also used a camera to capture a hidden scene in his level. But in his case, he even had a cube, and everything within this cube is captured and all that stuff is explained in his part of the article. But what separates his approach from mine and Sultans is that he even added some interactivity. You could use your mouse to move some pins up and down, which looks really nice. And he also did some experiments with a music video using as an input. Here you can see the result, but without music to avoid any copyright problems. Also interesting, the geometry was not created in a 3D program, but he created it all by code. And since there is a vertex limit for each geometry chunk in Unity, he had to copy one chunk several times during the rendering of one frame to create a bigger surface for the Pintable. In the article you can find more info about that and pictures of his shader graph and all that stuff. And also other experiments like a peak blur shader, he called it, which is basically the pins move upward faster but go down slower and change color, so you have kind of a trail. And here again you can see the results of his work, which look really nice in my opinion. And he also provided a Unity WebGL export, so you can try around with it. You can move your mouse and push some pins upwards, and top left you can see the high map and the color map, which are created in real time. And this is really nice to experiment with. And if you want to know more about every detail, how it got implemented and all that stuff, then please visit the article. And if you like what we did, if you like the idea of the project, leave a comment and write us your opinion. We would love to hear feedback, because this is different from the other articles I produced until now. And thank you for watching this video. We really hope you liked it, and see you soon.